Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, we're going to be talking about Outriders. This is a third-person RPG shooter that is currently in development by People Can Fly, who developed Gears of War, Judgment, and Bulletstorm, as well as been a part of a number of other projects. It's also being published by Square Enix, who actually sponsored me to go to the event and make this video. So thank you to them for sponsoring me and making this video happen in the first place. Now, while I will be sharing with you what I experienced at the event, my thoughts on what I saw and played, everything you're going to see here is currently in development. All gameplay is still subject to change, and the developers talked a lot about how intensely they're looking at the balance. So I'm not going to go too deep into things like skill trees and individual skills for this video. Oh, and one last thing before we go any further. Big shout out to Danataj, a fellow content creator who actually provided me with some additional footage for this video. I didn't get to play Pyromancer much, so he gave me some footage of that. And there's also some other footage sprinkled here and there, such as highlighting over the skills when we talk about that a little bit later. So big shout out to him, and with that, let's get started. So first, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay, and I'll sprinkle in comments from the developers, but I really want to go deep into talking about the developers themselves a little bit later in the video. When I got there, I got to play an approximately 2-hour demo and capture footage from Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, I had a choice of 3 classes to play. We were told there's a 4th one, but we got no details on it, so you're not going to learn anything about that 4th unknown one in this video. Each of the 3 classes had a specific range and theme, and different skills, including unique self-healing tools, in order to stay alive and defeat enemies. The first class we can talk about is the Pyromancer, a medium-range class that blasts enemies with powerful fire magics. Now again, thank you to Danataj for the footage here, because I didn't get to see or play the class myself. Seems after watching a bit of his footage that we have here a decent range AoE damage and crowd control type class. They can burn enemies for damage over time, stun them in place, and even blow up tagged enemies with their thermal bomb for even more AoE carnage. So this is almost more like a traditional caster in a sense, of course with guns. It also heals anytime a marked enemy or someone marked with the Pyromancer skills dies, so it's a safe and reliable heal from further away. Now, I didn't get to play this at all, and it does look fun, but the other 2 classes definitely seem like they're more my style. Trickster, on the other hand, is a close-range hit-and-run class that I got to play through the entire demo with. I actually found Trickster incredibly fun. I love close-range combat in gun games, ironically enough. Now, this was largely, from my experience, about slowing time around enemies and making use of that time to exploit weaknesses or just to blast them to smithereens. I had skills like melee attacks, such as a sword that would slash through all the enemies and slow them for a bit and then cause them to explode if they took enough damage. I was able to create a barrier that slowed the enemies inside of it and even slowed the projectiles that were going through it, making it kind of a safe place when I got to a dangerous area. My favorite thing, though, was the ability to teleport behind enemies. I'd often find myself teleport behind an enemy, blast him with a shotgun, maybe hit him with the sword, and then cover myself with the barrier, and then when the barrier fell off, I could teleport to another enemy and try to zip around the battlefield. It was a lot of fun, and considering those were largely just the first 3 skills without any sort of modification through gear or the skill tree, it was already off to a really good start. Now, this isn't particularly tanky, at least not when I played it early in the game, so I generally had to, as they say, hit and run. I had to get in, do my damage, and get out or get to a safer area. Now, the self-healing for the Trickster is when you kill enemies in close range, you'll get a heal, and it'll also extend the shields that you have to help you stay safe. Now, I had a little bit of time to play the Devastator, which is another close-range class, but more of a tanky one. This was the most fun I had personally when I did my second playthrough with it. I had bonus armor from one of my skills, and I was constantly just point blank in enemies' faces with a shotgun or just with my various skills and melee attacks, just destroying enemies and mowing them over. I love being in the thick of it, and getting to play this incredibly tanky class worked out perfectly. It helped that I had some experience on my Trickster, where I was used to zipping around and trying to stay out of the line of sight, but on this, I was able to just go full ham and just walk up to enemies and just keep knocking them over. It was so much fun. Luckily, Devastator also heals when enemies are killed in close proximity. I'm not sure the difference between the Trickster and the Devastator's heal. Maybe the Devastator heals for more since they have the bonus armor from one of their skills. They don't need things like a shield extension, but this is in development and could change by the time we actually get to play it, so I won't think about it too much. Now, I actually played solo in all my footage, but this is actually a co-op RPG experience. You can choose to play it alone and enjoy the story and game at your own pace, and the game will respect that. However, you can also play with up to 2 friends for a total party size of 3, and I saw a lot of merits for playing in groups, especially as I went through once as the Devastator and once as the Trickster. There were plenty of times as the Trickster, I wish there was somebody to maybe grab the attention of the enemies while I zipped around the back lines. And as the Devastator, while I was up there and smashing them in the face, I would have made the perfect distraction for someone like a Pyro to AoE enemies down once I had them all up in my face. So I could certainly see the merits and the way that the classes cooperate, and I can't wait to see how the 4th class works into this. If it's more of a healer or another long-range DPS or something like that. I feel like if these 3 already complement each other as well as they do, a 4th is only going to work into that mold just so well. Now, as for the actual gameplay, the gunplay and controls were mostly smooth. I was playing on a PC, and I bounced back and forth between playing with controller and keyboard and mouse, but I always go keyboard and mouse for something like this, so it is what I spent the majority of my time playing with. So I generally found it was smooth. It kind of reminds me of like a less weighty Gears of War, or even like a less weighty Remnant, for example, and it works well when I'm trying to navigate aiming my skills and whatnot. I did find at first I had a little bit of trouble navigating cover, but I found that I worked this out after about an hour of playing, so you know what, I'm going to put that one on me. The big thing with the gunplay and the controls is that you spend about as much time using your gun as you do trying to figure out how you want to use your skills, at least in the early game. This was in line with what we were told with the developers, and I was glad to see that because I could pop off 2 or 3 shots with a shotgun, then go for a skill, 2 or 3 shots with a shotgun, a different skill, and I never felt like I was just stuck in one mode or the other, regardless of the type of encounter I had. I found I had options, and if I could bring a short-range weapon and a medium or a long-range weapon, and then maybe a sidearm for, you know, specific scenarios, I was able to be pretty flexible. And so even with the class identity, it just seemed that every piece was trying to work in equilibrium. And normally I don't find that when I play a lot of more class-based games like this, but it was working well, at least for the early game. Now, as you play and beat enemies, you'll level up, you'll earn new skills, and you'll earn skill points to go through a skill tree. You can progress through 3 different skill trees and really tailor your experience to what you enjoy most, but because we only got to play a very early portion, unless I just scroll over the skills and see what they all did individually, there's not really much to say, and considering how much the developers were talking about balance being super important, how they were constantly retuning things, I don't want to get hung up on the details of the skill trees. But so far, 3 classes with 3 different, I guess I can call them, what's the word I'm looking for? Specializations in these skill trees. We're already looking at a good amount of variety across all the classes when the game actually releases. Now, I'm a big RPG player, and the game in the 2 hours I played had an intense focus on the narrative. And this is where I kind of want to start talking a little bit more about the developers themselves, because this is where I got to hear a lot of what they had to say, and I agree with it on a very spiritual level. The developers made a point to say 2 things about the narrative and the story. One is that it is essential to any RPG experience to have a deep narrative and lore. I completely agree, and they seem to be very focused on making that part of the experience. The second thing they said is they know the story they want to tell. They know how it will begin, and they know how it will end. It will also begin when you buy the game and end when you beat the game. People Can Fly and the developers we had the opportunity to speak to put emphasis on this not being a game as a service. No loot boxes, no pay-to-win cash grabs. When you buy it, it should feel like you got a complete experience. That includes the story, and that includes the content. I personally asked after hearing this if they had any plans for post-launch support, because as much as I love a complete experience, if I love something, I'll always want more of it. To which I got a reply that I really enjoyed. They replied and said that they needed to launch the game before they thought about that. And that's, you know, a refreshing thing to hear, because most games already talk about, you know, what'll be in the expansion pass and all that stuff. So I was really glad to hear them say that. But, you know, no matter what, they don't want you to feel like what you bought wasn't a full game. Now, this does also mean that the game, because they know how it begins and it ends, they also mentioned that it wouldn't have branching choices with the story. So you'll have dialogue options to learn more about the world and the characters if you want to, but the ending is not going to be shaped by your decisions. It is going to end in a very set way. It is a straightforward narrative. Speaking of the story, there were side quests that actually had this interesting feature to them. You can actually re-challenge side quests infinitely once you found them. I asked the devs about this because it's not something I normally see, and they said they did this for a number of reasons. One is that sometimes when you're playing with friends, you guys want to just skip the cutscenes and get to the gameplay. So they wanted to give you the option to go back and redo the quest at your own pace later on if you really wanted to, and just watch and experience the cutscene. On top of that, you can farm rewards if you feel the need, or challenge the quest at different difficulty levels. So you could choose to do them once like you would in any other RPG, but they're flexible, and that's going to be a big theme for some of the other features we're going to talk about here. So flexibility is definitely shown when talking about the difficulties. As you play through the game, you earn what are called world levels. The higher the world level you have set, the more difficult the enemies and the better the loot. You can only unlock higher world levels by playing at the highest one you currently have unlocked. So should you want an easier game, you aren't forced to go up to the higher levels if you don't want to. You can stay on like world level 1 or 2 and have a more casual gaming experience, or every time you get a new world level, you can just leave your game in that world level and work on unlocking the next one. The challenge during the demo, I felt, had a pretty good scale to it. I went from world level 1 and 2 in the tutorial to 3 and 4 as I was going through chapter 1. The flexible difficulty system was great because when I went down to the lower difficulties, it was noticeable. So I was getting a reasonable challenge by just letting it upgrade the world level and setting it to update every time a new one came out. But it's entirely up to you. If you want more loot and more difficulty, then you have that option. It went all the way up to, I think, world level 15 in what I experienced. And I only got to world level 4. So these enemies probably get pretty crazy later on. But my favorite reason to increase difficulty is better loot, which we only got a small taste of. Man, did I really want to see what crazy stuff they might have in store. We saw some items of multiple rarities, some basic effects that would change the way certain things worked early game, but the devs had some strong words about how impactful items like legendaries are going to be later in the game. They said not only can you expect kind of the things that you always expect with legendaries. You expect maybe something resets your cooldown upon using a certain skill, or maybe it stores up charges, maybe it changes the effect to be a different element or to be a different effect altogether. But they hinted that some items may give you a taste of the other classes. Now, when you pick a character, you're locked into that class. If you want to play as another class, you have to make another character. So having these items that let you kind of dig into the other classes, sort of, is a pretty cool concept. My imagination could come up with some pretty crazy possibilities even this early in what I played. So if that loot delivers as much as they are suggesting, there's going to be a lot of variety between that and the skill trees. Now, I'd say that's kind of the bulk of what needs to be said about Outriders. There's some other details that are absolutely worth mentioning. There's a hub town for Chapter 1 in particular. I don't know how that evolves later on. They said that we gradually begin to explore outward and unlock new things like fast travel points and brand new locations altogether. They put a lot of emphasis on having a pretty massive and diverse world once we get past the early parts. And I really want to see that come to fruition because it's just a great thing to be able to pull in and absorb. We started in this kind of war-torn area early on, and I want to see how we get to explore the planet of Enoch that we're on as we go further and further out from what is the safest spot in the early part of the game, and that's barely safe at all. They also have sectioned off areas for specific side quests and markers to point you to them, or the main quest itself. Having these doors that kind of lead you to where you can complete the side quest seems like it's mostly for the co-op feature, like, someone goes up to the door and it gives everyone some time to either agree to do it or to cancel it, a little bit of communication required. But overall, I'm okay with that. I wish it was like one continuous experience like it is for the main story, which very rarely sent me into any loading screens or anything like that. But that being said, I don't mind this kind of system specifically because of the co-op features of the game. In the hub itself, there were vendors with rotating guns for purchase, monies and scraps that you could earn and make items that you needed, but we didn't really get to dive that deeply into this minus buying stuff from the shops, so I can't really provide too much commentary other than that those basic features are there. I think that covers the majority of the gameplay. I don't want to go too deep into spoilers, and I don't want to go much deeper into specific numbers on skills. I feel like class overview and some comments about the story and the devs really sets the tone for what Outriders could be when it releases in holiday season 2020. I gotta say, while the game was great, my overall favorite part of the event was the devs. They spoke with us quite a bit and even answered a few questions like I mentioned earlier. Some of the answers, I expect some people will talk about them. There was a really big focus on PvE, for example. So they said they needed to get that balance right and that PvP wasn't, really the focus of the game. It's a very narrative driven, it's an RPG, and they want deep RPG elements, which I'm a super big fan of. But then they also say things that are less divisive and that I think we can all kind of agree on. I remember somebody asked what endgame would be like, and they said, well, we need to make sure we finish the endgame content before the game comes out, not after. That is not something you hear very often nowadays, and I have no doubt that if this game does well, we'll see DLC, we'll see additional content. I don't doubt that for a second, but it'll be because we wanted it, because the game did well, and not just because that's how the market works nowadays. So People Can Fly, you have my support based on how your developers spoke to us at the event, and I had a fun time playing. I had very, very few problems with it, minus like one technical error that I had at one point that really didn't affect the experience overall. So if you can produce a strong third-person looter shooter with a great story like you're trying People Can Fly, you've got my support, because that has me written all over it. But anyway, let me know what you thought about what you heard here, whether it be gameplay related or about what the devs said. Put that in the comment section of the video below and get some discussion going about Outriders, because I'm excited to see how it pans out when we get to holiday season 2020. Thank you again to Square Enix for sponsoring this video, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I will see all of you in the next video, and until then, take care.